The only time yes is when those little nut and chocolate bars. What is the correct bar for that?
That's mainly nuts. Nuts are usually heights.
But what if you really want to because of the chocolate?
Eights for the nuts.
If yes, then that would be shako,
And what
but
if
it's unlikely.
you like them both?
I think he would go after the majority. I think so. Does it say that clearly? Does it say? Right. Okay, we're holding on Mem Gimel Amud Beis at the Mishnah. Meicher Avdei. Thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day. If we learn again this week, Thursday night is not a good night because it's the fast. Fast is on Thursday.
Thursday day?
No, we're going to learn Thursday. Every day in the morning should be normal.
No,
but I want to learn one extra day.
Thursday is
Shavuos V'Tam, right? So Tuesday night is an event by Chaim. I don't want to do
4th
that.
of July. So you only left for Wednesday?
I'm not able to. So it's either tonight or Monday night. What's better, Sunday night or Monday night?
Monday, the rabbi gives it.
So Sunday night. So let's aim for an extra hour tonight after Myra. Is that all right?
Yeah. If I'm not here, you'll be on Zoom?
Yeah. Okay.
At 8:45.
Yeah, 8:45, 8:50. Let's aim for that. Okay, so we're going to start the Mishnah. It says, there's a problem with selling a non-Jewish slave to a non-Jew because you're taking him away from doing the mitzvahs. So if you have a non-Jewish slave, it's called non-Jewish, but he actually is partially Jewish, he is supposed to keep mitzvahs. So if you sell him to a non-Jew, there's a fine that's placed on him, and that is that the person that sold him, the original Jewish owner, is obligated to redeem redeem him back and set him free. The same thing applies if he sells him outside the land of Israel. If he's living in Israel, he sells him to a Jewish person outside the land of Israel, he's also removing him from some of the mitzvahs because he's moving out of Israel. And so also the same rule applies, is that we force the original owner to redeem him and to set him free. We'll see, there's going to be a discussion about this. Well, if it's the original owner or if it's the second owner, the purchaser, the seller or the purchaser, we'll have a discussion about this. Tana Rabbana. It was taught in a brisa. If someone sells a slave to a non-Jew, he goes free. And he needs which rabbi? Mirabi Rishon. And he needs a deed of manumission from his first owner. Which means the first owner is still the owner. And he has to set him free. Amr Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, when do we say the Shleikosov of Einai? This is if he didn't write Einai. Now we're going to see in a moment what Einai is. But if he wrote for him the Einai, then the Einai itself is his freedom. The Gemara asks, my Einai, what are you talking about? What is it? How do they translate it there?
What if you wrote a document for him?
A document, okay. They're not telling you. My Einai.
It's first ingredient.
It's
chocolate.
Okay. That we're going to see later on in the Gemara. Yeah. My Ainai, what does it mean? What is this type of document? Amar Rav Sheshes the Kosav Lehachi. He writes the following: that when you run away from him, you don't come back to me. So he's saying that when you escape from your second owner, I don't get you back, which means basically that I'm freeing you. Okay. We didn't explain, is he buying him back or not? Yeah.
It seems weird, like he collected the money for selling him, but then
No, we didn't explain. There's a
No, 'cause
detail.
He wasn't
there's a
really
detail
supposed to
missing.
sell it.
So you're saying it's not considered a sale?
It
So
might
who
not be-
gets the
they're
money?
saying Nonetheless,
Right,
if you run away, I have nothing.
right. We'll see later on who gets the money. If the money returns or if the money stays by them. Okay. Taner Rabbanan, starting in the Brisa. Lava alav min oived kechavim. Now what we're talking about is when the Jewish person borrows money from the non-Jew and he makes his slave as a collateral to pay back that loan, which means basically that he's going to be paying back, he's going to be selling his slave to the non-Jew. Once the Oived Kechavim makes him his nimusai, then he goes free. My nimusai, what does it mean nimusai? Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda nashki. Rav Huna bar Yehuda says nashki, which is a type of branding that they would do. They would put some sort of what do they call it over there? Is it a necklace or something? A seal. A seal they would put on him to show that he's a slave. So that means that basically,
So this document's like a prenup.
well, no, there was a document before that we were talking about that was called Ainai. The Ainai was that if you escape, I don't get you back. Now we're talking about something else. Now he's borrowing money from a non-Jew. What's going to be the collateral is the slave, which basically means the slave is going to come and take the non-Jew is going to come and take the slave, which is basically a type of sale. You weren't allowed to sell a slave to a non-Jew. So once the non-Jew takes possession by giving him this seal, puts a seal on him to show that he's a slave, then he goes free. Masav Rav Sheshes says, what are you talking about? The Nimusa, you're translating Nimusa like in a funny way. Harisin, Ba'chakiras, Ba'arise Batiyavis, Ba'ibit Kechavim, Shamashkan Shadeu Yisrael, Afpisha Asalei Nimusa, B'terem and Amaiser. Here we're talking about people that are working a field. So an artist is someone that works the field and he gets a certain percentage of the produce. There's a field owner, and then there's the sharecropper. It's called. He takes a portion of the crops. A chakiris is someone that doesn't take a portion of the crops, but he takes a certain amount every year. It's not a ratio. And then the Arise Batiyavis is someone that's an aris, like we said before, he takes a portion, but it's already been in the family for a long time. Even his fathers were arisin in this property. So what happens is, they gave their property, it all belonged to a non-Jew.
Because the field belongs to a Gentile, it's not.
So it should be exempt from Meiser. Should be exempt from Meiser. The only thing is that there's a Jew that's somehow taking slight possession over it, either because he's a sharecropper or because it was a collateral that the non-Jew gave to the Jew. So Alpha Pisha Asalei Nimusai, even though he made for him Nimusai, and we're looking at the word Nimusai, Turim and Meiser, it's still exempt from Meiser, even though the Jew is now some partial owner in it. It's still exempt. Now the problem is Isal Kadaitach Nashki, and if you say that Nimusai meant the seal that they would put on a slave, so how do you translate it over here? Sada Bas Nashki, you put a seal on a field. You know, it was a type of necklace or earring or something that they would put on the slave. How do you do this to the field? Like, obviously, you didn't translate it right. Ella Amar Rav Sheshes Zman means the time. Nimusa means time. So we'll go back to the first brisa. It says that if someone borrows from a non-Jew and he makes a slave as a collateral, so once becomes the nimuse, once it becomes the time, which means the time that he was supposed to pay back, then the slave goes free because that's considered a sale. So over here also, even though the time came for him to pay back that loan, the Jewish person was supposed to pay back the loan, but no, the non-Jew was supposed to pay back the loan, and the Jewish person, the non-Jew doesn't have the money, so he ends up taking the field. If that's the case, then he should be getting the field. He should have to be chayiv and
The
meiser.
Jew borrowed from the non-Jew, that's why he can't even slave.
Okay, that case number one was the Jew borrowed from the non-Jew. Case number two is the non-Jew borrows from the Jew. No, the case number one was the non-Jew borrows from the Jew. Case number one was the non-Jew borrows from the Jew. Follow? The non-Jew borrowed from the Jew. And the Jew had a non-Jewish slave that ends up going to the non-Jew as a repayment of the loan. That was case number one. Ruvain borrows from John. Okay.
So the
Yeah.
Jews borrowing from the non-Jew.
Yeah. Now the Jew has a slave. I don't know what his name is.
Like a mosque.
He gives him as a mashka. Now, basically, when he doesn't pay it back, the slave ends up in the non-Jew's hands. That was our problem. You're not supposed to sell a slave to a non-Jew. Okay, now we have another case. We are, the non-Jew borrows money from the Jew. John borrows from Reuven. And he has a field, but he doesn't pay it back. He doesn't pay back the loan. So now the field
That belongs to whom?
to John is now coming into the possession of Reuven, and it really should be chayiv and meiser. So, but nevertheless, we say even though the time came, it's still exempt from meiser. So, the Gemara says, one second. We say zman. It's talking about the musa. Actually, now we're just translating the word. It means time. It says kasha zman azman. But then why by the non-Jew, by the slave, we say that it becomes the non-Jews when the time comes to pay back? Why by the property, when the time comes to pay back, don't we say that it belongs to the Jew? We should be chayiv and meiser. Gemara says like kasha. It's not a question. Difference is if the time came.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Okay.
1 second, let me.
Huh?
Okay. So we're talking about now that if the time came, that obviously by the slave the time came to pay back, and that's why it belongs to the non-Jew, and by the field it didn't come. If the time came, that's what you have to tell me. You have to tell me that it belongs to the non-Jew. That's obvious, but the time comes to pay back, you don't pay back to the collateral is taken. We're talking about both of them, the time has not come. And it depends what he was acquiring by this collateral. By the slave, he was acquiring the actual slave, and by the field, he was acquiring the fruits, but not the actual field.
So if the time has not come yet, whose fruits are those? Who can use those fruits?
Really, it should say that the time came. Just 1 second. What's saying is, thing is like this: by the slave, because he wasn't supposed to be using a slave as a collateral, so we give him a fine even before the time comes. The slave is basically going to go free even before the time comes. He wasn't even supposed to make that arrangement. By the field, it's really, he's exempt from Meiser, not only before the time comes, but he's exempt from Meiser even after the time comes. So there are extreme examples here.
So the slave being set free, that's a rabbinic kanas?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I didn't go through the Tosfos.
Rashi says that he's allowed to collect from the produce when the king never takes possession of the field.
Right. Right.
Wait, who can use the produce?
The Jew can use the produce after the time comes, but that doesn't mean that he's chayav in Meiser because it wasn't his field. It was grown by the non-Jew. Iba Yisema.
So if it's a Shemitah year, he could use that too. Because it's not
Could
really
be.
his field.
Could be. We didn't discuss that, but could be. Iba Yisema. Another interpretation. B'shalava al manas lamashkanai v'le mishkanai.
Oh, by the way, don't eat grapefruits from Costco.
They're from Israel?
They say in America, but they're all from Israel.
Oh, really? Okay. When we said that the field, when the non-Jew borrows money from the Jew, it was on condition that if he doesn't pay back, then the land is going to go to the Jew. So why is he putter from Meiser, even though he said the land? Because until the Jew actually comes and takes it, it's not his. So if the Jew takes the fruits, it's exempt because he didn't take the actual land. What about the slave? By the slave, it doesn't matter because just the fact that he made that arrangement, we're already making a fine on it. Okay, Taner Rabbanan.
Well, he didn't make the appropriate kinyan for the land.
Right.
It's a different.
Can you buy land with money?
Don't you still have to do so?
No, I'm not sure. Not necessarily produce is possession of the land. Okay. Tanu, it depends how he does it. If he shows ownership. Tanu Rabbanan. In a brisa, let's say someone, the non-Jew was owed money by the Jew, was owed money from the Jew, but instead of getting the money, he goes and he takes the slaves. Now it's not really the Jew's fault. The Jew didn't set this up, that he's going to give a slave to a non-Jew. It was just, he didn't have the money. The non-Jew comes in and takes whatever he can get. So you end up taking the slave. Sukrikin are gangsters that they come and they take possession, and unless you make them happy with something, they'll kill the person. They're bandits. So then we don't put a fine on him. He doesn't go free. Umar says if he uses the slave to pay back a debt, he doesn't go free. Veramini, we have a contradiction to this. Let's say the government takes the person's granary, if they take it as a debt because he owed money to the government, then chayav la'aser. Then the Jew is responsible to take meiser because produce that you sell, you also have to take meiser from before you sell it. So he was obligated to take meiser. But if they take it, how do they translate anparis? But how do they translate over there? Anparis. Let me look at your book.
Unjust seizure.
Unjust.
Seizure.
Confiscated. Yeah, I like
They confiscated. If it's just confiscated and unjustly, so then patim alasa. He's exempt. What are we seeing? The point is not the unjust one. The point is the debt one. That from the debt, we see that he is chayiv to take meiser. And when you're saying about the slave, when they take it from the debt, basically we see it's considered like a sale. So if they take the slave as a debt, it's considered like a sale to the non-Jew. Sale to the non-Jew incurs the fine that the slave goes free. So The Gemara says, Shani Hasam the Kamishtar Shalei. There's a difference. Over here, he's actually gaining because they took it without Meiser being taken. That means he ends up paying back with Meiser money for his debt, which that was not the case by the Eved. When they used the Eved, it wasn't considered that, it wasn't that he was gaining something, they just took the Eved. But here when they take the produce, really they should have taken produce that Meiser was taken from, which means Meiser was already, this would be perfectly pure produce. Instead they took produce that had the Meiser in it, which means that part of his repayment of the debt was Meiser. So for that he has to take out.
Understand, when they took the evidence, why isn't this case not the same as the listing that had the evidence before you have to mishtachar the evidence, just like a Jew? All of a sudden we forget about that law. Why is it not applicable?
No, that was the law where if he sold it, we put a fine on him.
No, the one where he ran away and he was, the ransom story. And we say the Jews were hired to ransom out.
To bring him back.
Yeah, how comes over here we don't even consider that he has to get him back?
We do. That's what we're saying. He does have to get him back.
Doesn't sound like it. Just sounds like he's got to square his deal out.
No, he's the regarding getting him back, that's a different story. The question is when he gets him back, does he have to set him free?
Skip day went to
Yeah. Oh, really? What is it?
Sicario?
Sicario
Yeah,
is a hitman?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. I believe that there's actually a blade called a saccharin or something, and these bandits use this blade. What does it say?
Oh, that's why it comes from that.
Sicari, meaning assassin or murderer, which starts from the Latin sica, which is a dagger. Yeah.
That makes sense. It comes from Latin.
Right.
Latin American language.
No, but a lot of Spanish words come from that.
Why is it called Latin America?
I don't know.
So how do you know
I
it's
don't
not?
think it has anything
How
to
do
do with
you,
Latin.
maybe it has to do with Latin.
Professor, what's the answer?
Spain and Portugal ran the whole continent. Those are Latin languages, so maybe they call it Latin.
As opposed to what other language would be there that wasn't Latin?
That ran it. We would call it. Well, before it was Aymara and Quechua languages. So maybe it's just an indication. Yeah.
No, it's probably as opposed to North America, which English is not Latin.
No, not at all. It's a mixture. It's a mutt language.
Uh-huh.
It's got all these other languages from the north.
So Latin America as opposed to English. Okay.
English-speaking America.
Okay. The Gemara says Shani Hasam the Kamishtarsta because he's gaining. Okay. He's profiting. Toshima, come listen to Rav. Rav says, Hamecher Avdai Leparheng Ovid Kechavan. Parheng is also some sort of just an official. A guard. He's a guard of some. He goes free. Gemara says, "My havle lemevad." What did you want him to do? Havle lefayas v'lefias. You should have used money to appease this guard or official, and you didn't do that. So because you just right away gave him the slave, so that's why there's a fine on the person. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah has a question. Let's say you sold him for 30 days, and after 30 days he comes back, so it's a temporary sale. Well, Tashima, come and listen. Rav says, someone sells a slave to his official, he goes free. We're thinking now that he sold him only for possibly that maybe he only sold him for temporarily, right? A lease, right? Hassam, the Gemara said, Hassam no. Over there, you have no proof from that. Because that's talking about where he never returns. That was like an assumption that you made. You think you're going to answer a question on that assumption. Okay, we don't have an answer. Let's say he sells him, but not to do work, not to do any. He just sells him as to mate with the maidservant. This guy has a strong slave. This Jewish guy has a strong slave. This non-Jewish guy has strong maidservants. He wants them to. So he sells the slave just to mate, but not to do any averis or work or anything. So he's not really taking him out of the mitzvahs. Chutz min mitzvahs, mao. He says, I'm selling him, but he still has to keep the mitzvahs. Chutz mi Shabbos v'yom tovim. He doesn't belong to you on Shabbos and Yom Tov. L'ger Toshav, or he sends him to a ger Toshav. That's someone that keeps the 7 Noachide laws and lives in Israel. L'Yisrael mumar mahu. Let's say he sells them to a Jew, but a non-observant Jew, someone that is a like a heretic. Lakuti mahu, or if he sells them to a Samaritan, right? So what's going to be then? The Gemara says, "Psheit mi achada." We can answer one of them. What did you find out?
It's an article this long, so I just sent it to the group. You could read it in your own time. It's very complicated.
Uh-huh.
I mean, much more than what the professor was.
The professor simplified it for us.
You just have to read the whole
So
article.
what does the word Latin mean?
It's an article that's like this long.
I know, but it has to have a meaning.
It goes to all the romance, this and that, languages and this and them, and then says, no, it's more than that.
Okay.
It's a very long.
Not Jewish.
And it would be allowed to teach like Jewish to make with
That's a good question. Hillel's bringing up a good question.
Could you repeat it?
His question is, would he be allowed to mate with a non-Jewish maidservant? See, he's of course by his own master, he's obligated to keep the mitzvahs. And by his own master, if his master has maidservants, he mates with them, but they're also in the same boat. They also have to keep the mitzvahs. But now where he's selling him to a non-Jewish person who has maidservants, they're not Jewish at all. Apparently it's acceptable.
But he's not mishtachri.
The question is, it's not. Yeah, so you're saying that's why it's not a problem. The question is, when he's keeping these mitzvahs, what is his?
No, I'm
what
saying
is
that's
his?
why it is a problem. Because
Right.
he's technically still, and they've been chayav like a woman.
I know. So why is it? Why would it even be thought to be acceptable to have a mate with a non-Jewish maidservant?
Someone might think because he's not in the Jewish owner's house. Now he's in the, he could, but I'm saying that I don't think so because he still technically is going back to the Jewish owner in the end, and therefore he's still under his
The problem with selling him is that he goes out of his house and he doesn't have to keep, and he won't keep the mitzvahs in another house. Here you take him out of the house and he's not keeping the mitzvahs.
Isn't he going to come back?
Yeah, possibly, but let's say not. That was one case. One case was if he sells him for 30 days. Another question is if he sells him just to mate.
Just to me. What's your rule? What I like.
Okay, I don't know. Apparently, it seems that it would be acceptable. At least we're asking this question. We have one answer. When it comes to a ger toshav, selling him to what's it called? Ger toshav, a naturalized, right? What do they translate it? Ger toshav. It's a Gentile that lives in Israel. but he accepts not to worship idols. He accepts all the 7 Noachide
Oh,
laws.
right. So there would be like no height.
Noachide. So that's considered a non-Jew. Well, Kuti v'Yisrael Mumar, when it comes to a Kuti and a Samaritan and a Jewish person that's not observant or a heretic, Amri Lay, they say about this. One opinion says Kavit Kechavim. Amri La, the other opinion says Ki Yisrael, which basically leaves us in the same boat. That was our question beforehand. And now we have 2 opinions, but we have 2 opinions, which basically means we have the question again. Right? They have a question. They asked the question from Rabami. Well, this slave, he went and he joined the foreign legion and joined some army. Question is
Wagner, the guy in Russia.
what is
The
that?
Wagner army. Joined the Russian mercenaries.
Question is if he's allowed to take the owner's allowed to take the money for his signing up, because he wasn't supposed to sell him, but he went on his own, and now the question is, can the owner like get the benefits of that?
Like they're gonna give him the money.
Amalei Rab Yirmiyah Rab Zrika. Rab Yirmiyah says to Rab Zrika, Puk ayin b'mechiltech. Go look it up in your Mishnah. It's interesting.
It's like he's selling the slave. He takes the money, then the slave is emancipated.
Right. Well,
The early commentators would regard the meaning of the term Mishnah.
what do they say?
Some explain that is referring to the halakhic statement. The Rabbi Zerika had mentally ordered, and he was told to study that which he had learned, and that's Rashi.
Okay.
The one said that it's a regarding it why so change the reasoning behind the halakhic statement.
That's either a Mishnah or a Bryce. Nafik Dak Vashkach. He went out, he examined, and he found the Tanya. It was taught in a Brysa. If someone sells, I added in Beretz Yisrael. That was for my notes. If someone sells a house in Israel to a non-Jew, Dama Vasurim, he's not allowed to he's not allowed to take the money for that. But if the non-Jew forces him out of his house and the Jewish person can't get it back, he's allowed to take the money. And he can set it up even with the deed of sale, because the money that he's getting is like rescuing it from their hands. Okay. What are we seeing from here? That he's allowed to take the money. He should be allowed to take the money from the slave as well. He's allowed to take the money from the sale of a house in Israel to a non-Jew when it was against his will. He could also be allowed to take the money from the slave. The Gemara says, "V'dilma hani mili bayis." Maybe that's only by a house he can take the money. You see, what we're really concerned about is someone setting this up in a way where he's doing a trick. He says, look, I'm not going to make a sale. You go and run over there on your own, and afterwards I can take the money. So maybe by the house they'll do the same thing. Maybe he's going to say that, look, I can't sell you the house because it's in Israel. I'm not allowed to sell a house to a non-Jew. Why don't you steal it from me and then pay me? So he says that we're not concerned of that a person's going to do, because a house, no one can live without a house. So he's not going to set up some like dangerous arrangement that he's could end up possibly without a house. But a slave, where a person can live without a slave, this is something that he could risk. So then maybe this is not something that he would this is something we should put a fine on him. Or maybe not, we shouldn't put the fine on him. Shalachlu Rabami Mini Ami Barnasan Taira Yaitza L'chol Yisrael. How do they put that? How do they phrase that? Rabami asks Ami Barnasan, does he say, let the Torah come out from you to all of Israel? From you? Who's he telling? He's Rabami is telling Ami Barnasan that he's the Rabami sent the following message to the other sages. From me, Ami Barnasan, now he's saying from me, Minei, which means from me, Ami Barnasan, Torah emerges to all of Israel. Wow, that's quite a statement about himself. Okay. Interesting.
You gave a beautiful explanation at the end of Sultan, where they said that there's no more like person that he stood up. This just reminded me.
Right. So I guess he's paskening. Who did they ask this from? They asked this Rabbi Yirmiyah. This is a question of Yirmiyah to Rabbi Shvika, and Rabbi is going to answer this. He says a slave that throws himself, that gives himself over to a legion, he's absolutely allowed to take the money. What's the vav? Just quotes the Rambam. And he's allowed to arrange this, that the sale should be registered in the court. Okay, so in other words, we're not concerned that he's going to set this up originally in a deceitful way, to trick the slave sale.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, if someone sells a slave to a non-Jew, they give him a fine up to 100 times his value and to redeem it. Follow? You weren't allowed to sell a slave. Now you have to go and redeem him. The sages imposed a fine on him that he has to go buy him back. Sounds like the guy Salam Haba. Well, the Gemara says, Dafka, Elab Dafka. When you say 100 times, do you mean literally 100 times? Or was that just an imagination? Exaggeration? Were you just exaggerating it? Well, Tashima, come and listen. Damar Shlakish says, if someone sells a large animal to a non-Jew, there was a problem with selling a large animal. Do you have a note on that? Let's see what it says. It says the sages prohibited the sale of large livestock used for labor to a Gentile due to the concern that this may lead to a Jew renting or lending his animals to a Gentile who will then perform prohibited labor with the Jew's animal. The Jew sold the animal, he is penalized and must purchase the animal back from the Gentile, even if it costs up to 10 times the animal's value. It is permitted to sell such animals through a broker, as uncommon to lend or rent them in this manner. There are places where the accepted practice is not to sell small domestic animals to Gentiles as well. Today, the common practice is to be lenient about these issues, and the Shach offers various reasons why this is the case. Some of the issues had to do with Shabbos. They may end up doing work with your animal on Shabbos if you lend it. Huh?
He won't work.
It won't work on Shabbos.
Ain't gonna work on Saturday.
So you weren't allowed to sell. Now, let's say someone did. So it says, they give him a fine 10 times his value that he has to buy him back. Sold him for $100, to buy him back up to $1,000. So we're seeing that.
Good deal for the non-Jew.
that it's really only 10 times. It's not 100 times, right? This we said 100 times. That was an exaggeration. That's what it seems. The Gemara says, "V'dil mashani eved." Maybe the slave is different. So the slave is 100 times. The kol yom of yom mafklei mitzvahs, because every single day he's taking him away from doing the mitzvahs that he's supposed to be doing. So really, maybe by the slave it's 100, and by the animal it's only 10. Ikad Amri, there are those that said this exactly the opposite. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi was the one that said, if you sell a slave, you have to pay up to 10 times his value to get him back. Dafka lav dafka. In the Gemara, the question, is it only 10 times or is it even more than 10 times? Tashima, so come and listen. Rish Lakish says, if someone sells a large animal, he has to buy it back up to 100 times by the animal. So you see, it's much more than 10 times. That 10 times wasn't literal. It's different. Maybe by the slave. When you buy him back, what happens to the slave? He goes free. So by the slave, even when you buy him back, you don't have the slave. So maybe over there, they only find you 10 times. By the animal, when you buy the animal back, the animal goes to you. So they find you up to 100 times, because at least you're going to end up with something of substance, right? So maybe the slave was literally 10 times, and that's all. And the animal was up to 100 times.
Does the fine take place only if you buy it back?
Well, I don't know if they can impose that he goes free on the non-Jew, unless it was in Israel. Maybe in Israel they do.
No, let's say with the Behemoth Gas. And it's when he buys back, then he has to pay the fine. So the guy won't buy back.
No, not he has to buy it back. But he comes to the court, he says he doesn't want to sell it. They said, well, why don't you up the price? I said, I did. I upped it 99 times the value. He said, well, you have to do till 100.
Oh, because he has to.
He has to buy it back.
So the fine goes to the Gentile, not to the court.
Right.
It's just
Right. The Gentile
Okay,
ends up
by
with the
the
extra
value.
money, right?
The money goes to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has to buy it back.
yes.
Ela behema taimamai. So what's the reason why the animal goes up to 100 times? Yishum dehadrele, because you get the animal back. So it says 1 second. The math over here is not good, because 10 times you have to pay up until to be able to because you're going to lose what. So what's the real price that would the real fine is really 10 times the value, because why are we limiting it at that? Because you don't end up with the slave. So what would be the real price of the animal? You are getting the animal back. It would be 11 times, because 10 times plus the value. We're willing to impose a fine that with a loss of 10 times the value.
What happened to the 100?
That's what we're asking. How did you go? Why do we impose a fine of $100 to 100 times the value price on the animal? Because ultimately, when you buy the animal back up to 100 times, you're going to end up keeping the animal. So that's why we went so high in the fine. By the slave, we're only willing to go up until 10 times the value, because you don't end up keeping the slave. So ultimately, the real difference between the slave and the animal is only 1 time. It's only 1 time the value, because do you end up with the slave or do you end up not with the slave? You end up with the animal, not with the animal. So it should be 10 or 11, not 10 or 100. You pay up to 100 times because you're going to keep the animal. You should just add 1 extra time. It should just be 11. Rather, by the slave, it's not something that's common that a person should sell a slave to a non-Jew. Because it's not so common, they didn't make such a big fine. But animal was more common to sell. It's a commodity, so that's why they would they put up such a high fine. Some say it's Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Reb Zera. There's a different version of there. Rabbi Yomi asked Rabasi a question. Machar abda yumeis mahu. Sheyikansu b'nai acharav. Let's say person sold his slave. After selling the slave, he passed away. Do we impose the fine of repurchasing the slave from the son of the deceased, of the seller? Or was it only on the person that did this violation? Is it on the property basically, or is it on the person, individual? Is it on the estate or is it on the individual? Well, imtim tzalaymar, we're going to try to prove this from another case. Tzara ma'isen b'charu meis, kansa b'nei achar mishum disur deraisu, aval hachi sur derabanan. What about if a Kohen puts a mum in a firstborn animal? Now, a firstborn animal is a sacrifice, right? A kosher animal that has a firstborn, that firstborn is brought as a sacrifice. Non-kosher animal, it depends if it's a donkey, it gets redeemed. But a firstborn animal is a sacrifice. But it's a sacrifice that belongs to the Kohen. It's given to the Kohen brings it as a sacrifice. Let's say the Kohen doesn't want to bring it as a sacrifice, he just wants to eat it. So if it ends up getting a blemish, then it's not a sacrifice.
Can he do that?
He can just eat it, but he's not allowed to intentionally put the blemish in it. So let's say the Kohen does intentionally put the blemish in it. So then they made a fine. The fine is that you can never shecht it. You just have to leave it. You let it graze, whatever. You can never shecht it if he puts the blemish in it.
Wow.
Question is, what happens if he died? The Kohen dies. Does the son have the same fine that he can never shecht this animal, never slaughter this animal, that his father put a mum in? So even if we say that you put a fine, you impose a fine on the son, that's because the father committed a biblical prohibition by putting a blemish in the sacrifice. But over here, he didn't commit a biblical prohibition. He sold a slave to a non-Jew. That's only a rabbinic prohibition, selling a slave to a non-Jew. There's a problem of selling a slave, actually. But why is that not a biblical prohibition?
Biblically, right? It's like forever.
Wasn't there a biblical prohibition to sell a slave?
They say a bondsman forever.
Right.
I think it came from Leviticus.
Right. It's machlekes according to Rabbi Shmuel. It wasn't. It was a machlekes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel on Daf. Lamed Ches. Maybe that's who we're following. That's a little surprise. I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Do they have that in the note? No. They don't mention this issue. Why is it calling it a rabbinic prohibition? Well, it's a rabbinic prohibition to sell them to a non-Jew, but to sell them in general is a biblical prohibition. It must be that we're avoiding the biblical prohibition with some loophole. Okay.
Says here that it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that this one. We just assumed it was, yeah, I mean, biblical, it really is biblical.
No, I know he's not allowed to sell him to a non-Jew is only a rabbinic issue.
Right.
But I thought we said that you weren't allowed to sell a slave at all. So how do we come? How are you selling the slave the whole time? Either he was doing a sin, or we were understanding that he had a way out.
Maybe
But a
we
certain
were
a
always
certain
talking about rabbinic and just assumed it was biblical. But it actually was just a rabbinic prohibition. Well, here it says, it does not say anywhere in the Torah that it's forbidden to sell one slave to
okay, but we did say that for a mitzvah we were able to say that that you were allowed to sell a slave for a mitzvah. That's what we said. Remember, Rabbi
Yeah,
Eliezer
the story. that
freed
you were
the
ju-
to
but I'm
for the
saying
minion.
That was like saying when we did it, but this whole prohibition is rabbinic only. I'm just saying we always assumed it was biblical, now rabbinic. And they were finding out, no, it was always rabbinic.
Okay.
It's the easiest answer.
Yeah, but there was a verse there that he was quoting. It's hard to get out of that.
The verse to
That they should serve you forever. La'ilam mem
Yeah,
taved,
just
they
found
should
it.
serve you forever.
Leviticus 25:46.
was it say?
It says they should forever serve you, which means that anyone that frees a slave violates a positive commandment. So what you're saying is that your answer is that even though there's a verse, but that verse is just an asmachta, and it's just it's rabbinic.
It is
So if we were saying the way we were learning this the whole time is that it could go according to Rabbi Kiva as well. How was he selling a slave? We had all of these things: selling a slave, selling a slave. We were talking about where it was for a mitzvah, not selling a slave, freeing a slave. To sell a slave to another person, to another Jew, was no problem because still serving a Jew, right? Right? That wouldn't be a problem. But when we talk about freeing a slave, we're talking about that he was freeing for a mitzvah, he needed a minion. But over here, not selling him to because he needs a minion, selling him to a non-Jew.
Oh, so there's the answer against the pasuk. Selling is not is a rabbinic prohibition, but freeing
Maybe.
you could always do.
Dr. Stein's answering that to sell would not be a problem. It was only to free, to set him free. So back in that, it says Kol HaMeshacher Abdei. Anyone that frees a slave. Very good. Very good. Right.
Good, very good. I don't understand the answer I just gave. Yeah.
But that's only by freeing. Okay, very good. If you want to say Kivin Malachte b'mayir umeis leikonta b'nei achar, you see, there's another fine that's imposed. You're not supposed to do work on Cholamayid unless it's a davar ha'avid. Cholamayid is the intermediate days of the holiday. But if it's a matter of a loss of money, then you're allowed to. We said that if someone arranges his work that it should work out, if he doesn't do the work on Cholamayid, it's going to be a loss. But he arranged it for that. You know, he doesn't water it the week before. If he doesn't water it now, it's going to be a loss. But you set that up for that loss. So they put a fine on him that he should not be allowed to do the work then. So, but let's say he doesn't do the work, but then he dies. So, like they didn't put that fine on the children after him. The children are allowed to do that work by the Davra. That's Mishum D'Layavadi Surah. But that's because there was no prohibition that was performed. They just arranged it that he should end up getting the loophole, the leniency to be able to do the work. Hachamai, over here, there was a prohibition. So did they only put the prohibition on him and he's not here? Or maybe they put the fine on the estate, and the estate is still here. The money. The son has the money. So we see this in a Mishnah. Let's say there was a field that you removed the thorns from the field on Shemitah. You're allowed to plant right away, even though there was work that was done in the field on Shemitah, but that's not preparing the actual land. That's just removing thorns. And so therefore, after Shemitah wasn't a problem. What about Netaiva and Nadaira? Netaiva means that they fertilize the field on Shemitah. Nadaira means that they basically fertilize, but a deer is a pen. They would take the animals and put them in a pen on the field, and then they would move the pen. It was a temporary. They'd move it around so the manure would go all over the field. That was so that's another way of
I have a
fertilizing.
dog that does that.
Is that good for manure?
No, but it just does
Is that good
whatever it wants.
for fertilizer?
Yeah.
So so there's a fine. You're not allowed to plant. You're not allowed to use the field right after Shemitah. You have to wait. I don't know how long, but you have to wait. Well, but we've established the halacha. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, he's a later Amir in Eretz Yisrael, that if he fertilized the field and then he died, the son doesn't have the problem that the father had, and the son can work the field immediately after Shemitah. Alma, we see from this, when it comes to these fines, it's not on the property, it's not on the estate, it's only on the individual. So to over here, the person sells the slave, it's only on the individual, it's not on the son that he has to buy him back for 10 or 100 times the price.
I think your answer is that if one flower or fertilizes his field during this radical year in order to prepare for farming for the following year, he is penalized and prohibited from farming the next year.
The entire year.
Yeah, it's similar to the Shabbos. Like,
Right, you have to do the amount of time it takes to do that. Okay. Amar Abaya, you see, what I was thinking was, why is it the whole year? It should only be the amount of time it takes to fertilize.
No, fertilizers gives it over the whole year. Whereas,
Wow.
okay, it took you 5 minutes to fertilize, right? But that fertilizer serves to grow crops for a whole year. So
I know, but if I did it on Shemitah and I didn't wait till after Shemitah. So after Shemitah, I could have done it also. Let's say it takes me like 1 month to move the pen around. I don't know. So I should have to wait a month because that's I shouldn't be gaining that time.
no, because the fertilizer works for a
That's
year.
the effect of it.
but he even goes further that he's not allowed to lease the field to others.
Okay. Does it say if he dies?
Then
If he dies, the son is
if
allowed
he
to.
dies, his child is not penalized.
It's not penalized.
Ah.
Okay, good. Like our Gemara. Okay, Amar Abaya. Abaya says Naktinan. We have established the halacha that Timi Taresu Shel Chaveri Yameis like Kanser Rabbanan Achra. Let's say someone, we had this before recently. We have Hezek Shein and Nicker. We have this, maybe that was something else I was studying. If someone contaminates the produce of his friend, makes it in contaminated, now it's not a recognizable damage because when you look at it, you don't see anything.
Oh, we learned something.
You gave the reference of the wine.
Yeah. How long ago was that? Was that last week?
Last week we learned something. I recognize it.
Okay. So if someone contaminates his friend's produce, like even though he has to pay for it, he has to pay, even though it's the damage is not recognizable. But they didn't impose that fine on the child, on the estate after my time. What's the reason for that? Hezek sheini nikolai shmei hezek. A damage that's not recognizable is not considered a damage. However, it was only the rabbis that imposed the fine. We don't want people to do that. If you're just gonna, so they said that you have to pay anyway, even though in a biblical level it's not considered a damage. So the rule is lidi de kansur rabbanan. They only impose that fine on the person himself, but libre like kansur rabbanan, they didn't impose that fine on the children. Okay, now the Mishnah said, if a man sells a slave to a Jewish person outside the land of Israel, the same thing, he has to go and buy him back and set him free. The slave goes free. And he needs it doesn't say he has to buy him back. It's the purchaser that has the fine now. When he sells him to the non-Jew, the first owner has to buy him back. When he sells him to the Jew outside the land of Israel, you're not supposed to, the Jews outside the land in the diaspora are not supposed to buy Israeli slaves. They do, then they, just like it's a problem with buying grapefruits. So if they do, then they have to set them free. It's our good shit from Rabbi Sheni. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Aimer. Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Pamim yatsa, pamim la yatsa." Sometimes he goes free, sometimes he doesn't go free. Ketzad, what's the case? Amar Pliny Abdi Machar Teyo LePliny Antuchi. Antuchi is probably Antioch. Says, I sold my slave. I've sold him to so and so from Antioch. La yatsa. He doesn't go free. Why? Because just because the person's from Antioch doesn't mean that he doesn't live in Israel. He's from Antioch. It's called, that's his last name. Right? Today we don't have so many names from cities, but there was the Vilna, Krakow, those were names that they used.
Spanish last names
Our
are like
cities?
cities in Spain.
Oh. Uh-huh.
Salvador.
Oh, so they came from those cities. Uh-huh. We do have a last name Yerushalmi. That's a name.
Oh, that's.
Right.
Or is it Israel in general?
There is a name Israel, last name Israel also.
But when we say Yerushalmi, do we acknowledge them?
Probably.
I read that.
So it doesn't mean that that he lives in Antioch. It means that he's from Antioch. L'antuche sheba Antuchia. He says, I sold him to this fellow from Antioch that lives in Antioch. Then Yatza, then the slave goes free. But Tanya, we have another brayso, L'antuchi Yatza, that if he sells him to an Antuchi, someone from Antioch, he goes free. L'antuchi ashari belud la Yatza. It's only if he sells him to Antuchi that lives in Lud, Lud is in Israel, that he doesn't go free. The Gemara says, like kasha, that's not a question. Hadisli base of Eretz Yisrael. Depends. If he has a house in Israel, so then he doesn't go free because he has a house in Israel. That's
He's gonna serve in his house. That's what the
Right.
slave's gonna work there.
that's the lo yatsa. But when is he yatsa? When does he go free? The Islay ushpiza Beretz Yisrael. He only has a
What's it
a
called?
place to stay.
Timeshare.
Timeshare. There's a timeshare in Eretz Yisrael. So then that's a problem. That's when he goes free. It says La'antuchi. Okay. Rabbi Yirmiyah has a question. Ben Bavel Shnasi Beretz Yisrael. Someone from Bavel that marries a woman from Israel. Okay, marries an Israeli girl. Now, this Israeli girl has slaves. She brings into the marriage slaves. Oh, this is a problem. Because the slaves are going to be leaving Eretz Yisrael and going to Bavel to be with their new husband. She's taking the slaves out. Is she considered selling them? But the intention is the intention is to go back to Bavel. Yeah, this is the daitai. He comes to Israel, marries a woman, and he wants to bring the slaves back with his wife with the slaves. Okay, this is based on a discussion. If she brings something into the marriage, and after they get divorced, she wants it back. It's called Nichsei Tzain Barzel. So Nichsei Tzain Barzel, different than Nichsei Malug. Nichsei Tzain Barzel is things that she brings into the marriage that get evaluated at the marriage, how much their worth is. Iron sheep. Remember the iron sheep?
Yeah.
So the husband then says, at the time of the divorce, he says, I don't want to give you the actual item. Sentimental, whatever, I like it. I'm just going to give you the money for it. She says, no, I want it. It's a some item from the grandfather, the great tzaddik. Something. He says, I'm keeping it. Okay. Well, this question that we have now of who's actually owning these slaves, is it considered a sale to the husband, where the husband at the end of the marriage pays money for it? Or is it something that gets returned to her and she really owns it the whole time, we're going to have this question on this on the slave. How's it going to work? So Tibayla Mandamar Dinima. Question is if she has the rights to be able to claim that I want the actual item. Tibayla Mandamar Dinimai. There's a question also according to the opinion that says that he has the rights to say I'm just going to give you the value. There's a question according to the opinion that says that she has the rights to say I want the actual item. Since she has the rights to say I want the actual item, so it's considered like hers and it's not considered sold to the husband. So there should be no fine on this when it goes to when she gets married. The slaves don't have to go free. Or maybe since the it's like subjugated to him. How do they translate Mishabdi? Let me see your book. Lean to the husband because he can keep the profits. Yeah, he can keep the profits. So then, it's considered his. We can ask the question the other way as well. We can ask like this. Adini might when he has the rights and he says that I'm just going to give you the money and I can keep it. Do we say that it's considered his, which basically means it's a sale, which was problematic. Or maybe since he doesn't actually own it entirely, it's considered hers. Because if he dies, it goes back there. Maybe it's not considered his, not considered a sale. Umar says, Teku, this is a question. I don't have an answer. How do they say the halacha is? They have the halacha over there about a slave that's from a wife.
No, it just says
In the comment on the side of the notes, you don't have one of the halacha notes. No, you don't have it. Okay.
I finally see here what tekum is.
Let it stand.
Yeah, one is tekum, will stand. The others, it's a natrikon, the tishbi is it's kushas bibayas.
Yeah.
Tishbi meaning Eliyahu.
Right.
Eliyahu tishbi will come and answer. I never knew that.
Yeah.
It's all right. That trumps now top from Murray Rav.
Amar Rabavo says, Shanali Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan taught to me. Rabavo is a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Eved sheyatza achar Rabbi l'Surya, u'machar shem Rabbi yatza l'cheres. This is like the Indian reserves, where you're sort of like in no man's land and you can get away with certain things. Well, Syria is Israel, but not really Israel. So what happened was the master leaves Israel and he goes to Syria. Slave follows the master to Syria. Now the master sells him in Syria to someone else. So he didn't sell him from Israel outside of Israel. He sold him outside of Israel to outside of Israel. He was already outside of it. So Yatza l'cheres, but nevertheless he goes free. The slave goes free. The problem is, but Reb Chia taught that he loses his rights to go free. He doesn't go free. He was outside of Israel. He went out of Israel. Only if he sold from Israel outside of Israel. Okay. So we have a contradiction. The Gemara says like Kasha. Kancha das Rabbi Lachser, Kancha das Rabbi Lachser. It depends. If the master intended to return, so then it was considered like he was sold from Israel to Chutz La'aretz. But if Shein das Rabbi Lachser, the master was staying there, then he was considered like outside of Israel. Then he doesn't go back. He lost his rights. Vatanya, but 1 second. Oh no, but not 1 second. This Vahatanya is a proof. Vahatanya, we have a proof because the word Vaha, that prefix Vaha could mean but, and it also can mean this. And this is the brisa. It says, Yotzei Eved Achar Rabbi l'Surya. The slave goes after his master to Surya. It says, Yotzei. What do you mean he goes after? Le'sagid le'nafik, he has to go after. It's not enough that he can't stay behind. He could stay behind. But Tanya Ina Kol Mitzion. But we have a Mishnah Ina Kol Mitzion. You don't take things outside of Israel. Ela Yot Eved Achar Rabbi l'Surya Machar Rabbi Sham. Rather, if the slave went out and the master sold him there, Imdas Rabbi Lachser, if the master had intention to return Kaif and I say, then we forced the new owner to free him. Imdas Rabbi Lachser. But if it wasn't the intention of the master to return, then Ein Kaif and I say, then the slave loses his rights because he went out on his own fault. The slave does not go free. Okay. Amar Rav Anan. Rav Anan says, Shamat minei demar Shmuel tarti. I heard two things from Shmuel. Mar Shmuel. One of them is this last case that we said, that the slave goes free or doesn't go free, and from Surya, depending on if the master had intention to return. The Idach, and we have another statement that he heard from Shmuel, the Itmar. It says like this: if someone sells his field on the Jubilee year itself, so the Jubilee year is supposed to go back to the master, right? Rav says, it's considered a sale, and it immediately returns. So the guy purchased it, the guy loses the money, and the guy gets his field right back. Shmuel says it's not sold at all. Not sold at all means that the money is returned to the purchaser. So he says like this: Bechada, in one of these cases, Hadris Vini. Oh, Enamachur means that it doesn't. 1 second. I gave an answer. The Gemara doesn't know what I just said. Hadris Vini. One of these cases, the money goes back to the purchaser. The sale money is returned. One of them, it's not returned. And I don't know which one it's referring to. Amar Rav Yosef, talking about one of the cases of Shmuel, either by the slave that sold and in Surya, and by the field that sold in the Jubilee year. Rabbi Yosef says, let's try to analyze this. Maybe we can figure it out on our own. Midatani bebraisa. You have a brisa that says, someone sells his slave in Chutz La'aretz. The slave goes free, and the second master has to write a deed of manumission. 1 second. Who's writing the deed of manumission? The second master. Shema Mina, we see, Kanya Rabbi Sheni. Obviously, the second master acquired. Otherwise, it would have been the first master. If it would have been that means that the money does not go back to the purchaser. The second master acquires it, and he's the one that sets him free. Which means the money stays by the. It's a fine on the purchaser, not a fine on the seller. Yeah. How would
that purchaser know if the original owner intended on it not going back or going back, which I think makes a difference.
It's a problem. It's a good question. Hill is asking. Ultimately, when it comes to Syria, it depended on if the master was going to return or not. So how could you? If it's the second master's problem, then that would be he would have to know if the first owner.
The buyer has to have due diligence.
Yeah, they would probably only impose the
research
fine
it.
if he said he was going to return. He's going back to Israel. So when did Shmuel say that it wasn't sold? The money goes back. Okay. And Shmuel said over there that the money, that it's not sold and the money's returned. Okay. That was by that's by the field. Right? By the field, we would say that by Shnasa Yovel that the money is returned. Ravanan, so why didn't Ravanan figure this out? Why did Ravanan have a question? Well, Brisa Leishmila, he didn't know this Brisa that Rabbi Yosef quoted. And if we want to answer from Shmuel that he says that it's not considered sold, then the money goes back. How do you know that it's not sold? And the money is returned. Maybe it's not sold, but the money is given as a gift. Not sold doesn't have to mean that there's no sale at all and the money is returned to the seller. The money is returned to the purchaser. Maybe the money is given as a gift from the purchaser to the seller. Just like we have a halacha. Someone marries his sister. Now, there's obviously no marriage to a sister, but he gives her money and he says, Hariyat Mekudeshasli. The Itmar was stated, someone gives money to his sister as a betrothal. Rav says, well, that's not a marriage. The money is returned. Shmuel says the money is given as a gift. So if it's a gift, then maybe the same thing over here. When he has the sale, that's not a real sale. That how do you know that the money is returned? Maybe he was giving it as a gift. Talking about the field. Okay, we don't answer that. Amalei Abaya le Rabbi Yosef. Abaya has a question on Rabbi Yosef. It says, why are we putting the fine on the purchaser? We should put the fine on the seller. Both of them had a prohibition. This one wasn't allowed to sell outside of Israel. This one wasn't allowed to buy the slave from Israel to outside Israel. It's not the mouse that steals the cheese. It's the hole that the mouse has that allows him to crawl through to hide the cheese afterwards or to get into the house. So therefore, we're not going to fine the seller that did the prohibition. We're fining the purchaser, because if not for the purchaser, they would have no one to sell it to. Says it, but if not for the mouse, then who needs the hole? So without a seller, there's no one to. There's no such thing as a purchaser. It's logical that where the prohibition is, which means right now the slave is in the hands of the new owner outside of Israel, that's where we're going to put the fine. Ahu Abda, let's go a little further, try to get to the Mishnah. There was a slave that ran away from Chutz La'aretz, out from the diaspora to Israel. Azal Maria Basrei. The master runs after him. Asal Kami de Rabami comes to Rabami. He wants to get a slave back. Amalei Nichtav Lachshtara Adama Kseiv Legita de Cherusa. Write a document for his value. That means that the slave is going to have to pay you his freedom. And but write him a deed of manumission. And if you don't do that, I'm going to extract him from you anyways, from Ravachi Barbaisha. So you might as well do what I'm telling you. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. It says, don't allow the 7 nations to live in your land, because they'll cause you to sin. Yachal, Ba'ivid Kechavim, Shekibel, Allah, remember talking about one of the non-Jews that accepted not to worship idols. Talmud Laimar, the pasuk says, and others, maybe even if he's a good person, and he like it's going to be an eved, not an eved, a ger taishav. Says, Talmud Laimar like tasker eved al adainav asher lechem yem adainav. Don't return the slave to his master that is being saved by you from his master. My takanasai, what should you do? Imcha yeshe b'kebecha, he should dwell with you. Rabbi Yoshe had a question. It says, don't return a slave to his master that he's being saved, that he's shinatzal elecha. Are we translating it as separated, or are we translating it as saved? He's separated. Well, how do they write it there? That escape, let's just say, that he escaped to you from his master. It should say, Me'im, it's supposed to say, Elehav mi ba'ilei. says Aviv. It says he's really being saved from he's coming to you from his idol.
Yeah, and
There's a dollar just passed. Don't return the slave back to the non-Jew.
Right.
Elam Rabbi Yosha says, we're not talking about a slave that's coming from a non-Jew to a Jew. We're talking about b'meicher avdei l'chutz la'aretz, talking about someone that sells a slave outside of Israel, a kasum medaber. 1 second, the Gemara says, so what would it mean now? B'meicher avdei l'chutz la'aretz, don't return him. Don't keep him by the master. What happens is, what we're learning from this pasuk, don't keep him by the master, rather set him free. Don't keep the slave by the master, you should set him free. The Kashlei Rabbi Yosha, Ravachi bar Rabbi Yosha, Ravachi bar Rabbi Yosha now is a question. That he's escaping to you, that he's escaping from you, because he's escaping from Israel to Chutz La'aretz. That's what it should have said. Ella Amar Ravachi bar Yosha, Ravachi bar Yosha switches the whole shot. We're talking about the Evet Shebarach Mechutz La'aretz La'aretz HaKasav Medaber. We're talking about where he ran away from outside of Israel to the land of Israel. Okay, what happens now? When he comes from outside of Israel to Israel, you don't send him back to outside of Israel. You have to either keep him in Israel as a slave or you set him free. Tanya Yidach, we have another brayso that says, "Leisasker Eved al Adainov," don't return the slave to his master. Rebbe says that's talking about talking about that someone purchases a slave on with the intention to free him. Echidami, what's the case? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the Kosovle, he writes to him the following: when I purchase you, you're already free from now. That means because he's told him that at the time of the purchase he's going free, he can't then change his mind after the purchase and say, no, you're really mine. Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda, his slave, Rav Chisda had a slave, and he ran away from his house to the house of a kuti. Or Beikutai. Beikutai is another place in Chutz La'aretz. I think they're kutim as well. They are kutim. Well, Shalach Lei, he sent to them. Shalach Lehu, he sends to them. Hadrun Ali, send them back. My slave is by you. Shalach Lei, they sent back. We don't return slaves to the master. They quoted a verse in the Torah. Shalach Lehu, he says, what are you talking about? You have to return the donkey, you have to return the garment, you have to return all the lost objects of your friend, of your brother. But they sent back. But it says you don't return the slave to the master. He sent them. That's talking about when he runs away from outside of Israel to the land of Israel, like taught, that you don't return him back to Chutz La'aretz if he runs to Israel. Why did he send him that like Ravachi bar Yosha? Could have said, what could he have said differently? He could have said, I'm not sure. It says, Mishum Damashmalu Krai. Could have said, the reason why he said this was because the psukim fit better, and the people from Kutai don't follow the rabbi's rulings; they only follow the psukim. They followed the Torah without the oral law. Abaya irkasle chamra bekutai. Abaya lost the donkey by the kutaim. Shalachlu shadruli, send to them, send them back to me. Shalchule shalach simana, give us a sign that you that it's yours. Shalach lahu, he sent to them the chivra kresa, he has a white stomach. Shalchule, they sent him milav the nachmeniyat. If you weren't Nachmeni, if you weren't Abaya, that's Abaya's other name was Nachmeni, then Layav Mishajin Lach Nalech. We wouldn't have sent them back to you. Are not all donkeys have a white stomach? Now, I guess what they mean is that you must have you're obviously telling us. Oh,
Yeah, it's 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3. They're telling him that by a Talmud Chacham, you can trust him when he says that it's his, even though he doesn't have a perfect sign. Okay, let's leave it
It's
over
like
here. Should we
before we
learn?
said-
We'll learn tonight at.
Tonight,
Is that okay?
what time? Tonight is
8:45 Sunday night.
8:45.
Yeah, try to do a little catch up.
What you said the last thing about Talmud Chacham, we learned that he didn't need a star. Remember, they were just